My phone lit up at 1:52 in the morning. I was already awake. The number was my daughter's. I picked up before the second ring. She said one word, just one, before the crying started. "Dad?" I was already reaching for my keys, but not because I didn't know what was coming. I'd been waiting for this call for 6 months. "He's at the Meridian," Sarah said. Her voice had that particular quality, not the sound of someone discovering something, but the sound of someone whose worst fear had just been confirmed out loud for the first time. "Room 412. Her name is Vanessa. I have the photos. Dad, I have the texts going back to February." I sat on the edge of my bed. The room was dark, except for the streetlight coming through the gap in the curtain, a thin orange line across the floor. I didn't turn on the lamp. "How long have you had these?" I asked. "I found them tonight. His phone was on the counter and I wasn't looking. I swear I wasn't looking." She stopped. I heard her trying to breathe. "Dad, what do I do? What do I even do right now?" Have you ever been betrayed by someone at the exact moment you trusted them most, not suspected them, not watched them carefully, but genuinely, completely trusted them? I want to know where you're watching from right now, because what I'm about to tell you took me 6 months to build. And it started exactly the way you'd expect with a phone call I already knew was coming. I let 4 seconds pass, not because I didn't know what to say, because I wanted her to hear the difference between a man who was surprised and a man who was not. Then I said, "Sarah, listen to me carefully. You don't do anything tonight. You put his phone back exactly where you found it. You go to bed, and tomorrow morning, you call me before you say a single word to him." "Jesus." She slipped into the old word without realizing it. "How are you so calm right now?" "Because I've been ready for this for a long time." "Sweetheart," I kept my voice level, not soft level. "There is a difference. This is not a surprise, and it is not the end of anything for you. Do you understand me?" She didn't answer right away. I heard her crying. Slow down, not stop, but change. From panic into something more like exhaustion. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Everything that needs to be done," I said. "Go to sleep." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for another minute. Then I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out a folder I had prepared 7 weeks earlier. I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. Sarah met Marcus Reed at a fundraising event for a downtown Denver architecture firm late October 4 years ago. She called me the following Sunday, which was unusual. She normally texted. When she called, I knew it was something she wanted me to hear in her voice rather than read off a screen. She told me about him for 40 minutes. I let her talk. The first time I met Marcus was at a dinner she organized at Elway's on East 48th, the kind of restaurant where the steaks cost what I used to charge per hour. He stood up when I walked in, extended his hand, and looked me in the eye. He asked about my work. Not the polite version, the real version. He wanted to know what kinds of cases I'd handled, what the job had taught me about people. I told him a little, not everything. I never tell anyone everything. He was 31 then, managing commercial real estate projects across the Front Range, pulling in enough to live in a 2-bedroom in Cherry Creek. He wore a watch that cost more than my first car. For the first hour of knowing him, he gave the impression of a man who had everything organized, not because he said so, but because of the small things, the way he flagged the waiter without looking up, the way he remembered the name of the project I had mentioned in passing 20 minutes earlier and circled back to it with a specific question. His opinions were confident. His attention was deliberate. He made my daughter laugh 3 times before the appetizers arrived. I drove home that night and thought, reasonable man. That was the full extent of my assessment. They were married 14 months later. Small ceremony up near Evergreen. About 40 guests. Sarah designed everything herself. The table settings, the lighting, the flowers, and small glass jars along the aisle. She had a gift for making spaces feel inhabited rather than decorated. I gave a short toast. I told her she had always known exactly what she was doing, and that I trusted her judgment completely. I meant it when I said it. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be precise about when I noticed it, was at a company event Marcus hosted in the summer about 3 years ago, a rooftop gathering at one of his firm's completed properties in Lodo. Sarah invited me. I arrived to find her standing near the bar by herself, watching Marcus work the room, when his senior project director, a man named Dale Hutchins, walked over with his wife. Marcus stepped forward to shake hands. He introduced me Sarah's father, Rob, and then gestured vaguely toward Sarah without finishing the introduction. Dale's wife looked at her and smiled anyway. Sarah smiled back. Marcus had already moved on to the next conversation. On the drive home, I asked Sarah about it. She said he hadn't meant anything by it. She said he got nervous at work events and sometimes lost track of social details. I said, he didn't lose track. He made a choice. She looked out of the passenger window and didn't answer. I filed it. That's the word I use for it, filed. 31 years as a private investigator teaches you that the smallest decisions reveal the most durable patterns. A man who forgets to introduce his wife at a work event isn't distracted. He's making a calculation about what she's worth in that room. I filed it and said nothing more. The second thing I noticed was harder to file. It was a Sunday afternoon in early March, about 8 months after the rooftop event. Sarah had organized a small birthday lunch for her friend Kira at their house on Larimer Street. 4 people: Kira's husband Ben, Sarah, and Marcus. I was not invited, which was fine. I was not the point of the lunch. But Sarah called me that evening, and I could hear in the first 3 seconds that something had happened. She told me that Marcus had come home from a golf game 40 minutes late, while the food was still on the table. He had walked in, looked at the spread Sarah had spent the morning preparing the charcuterie, the flowers she'd cut from the back garden, the hand-lettered place cards she'd made the night before, and said, loudly enough for Kira and Ben to hear from the dining room, "You didn't tell me this was a whole thing. I would have eaten at the club." Then he had taken a beer from the refrigerator and gone upstairs. He came back down 20 minutes later when the lunch was nearly finished and sat at the head of the table and talked about his golf game for the remainder of the meal. Kira had tried to redirect the conversation twice. Ben had gone quiet. Sarah had smiled through all of it and refilled everyone's water glasses and said nothing. When she finished telling me this, she said, "He was just tired. Dad, he didn't mean it the way it sounded." I said, "What did Kira say when she left?" A pause. "She hugged me for a long time at the door." I said, "I know." I called Kira the following Tuesday. I had met her twice, once at Sarah's wedding, once at a gallery opening the previous fall. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her I was checking in on Sarah and that I wanted her honest read on things. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Caldwell, I've been worried about Sarah for about 6 months. What Marcus did at lunch, that wasn't the first time. It's just the first time I saw it happen in front of other people." I thanked her. I wrote her name in the small notebook I keep in my jacket pocket. I noted the date and what she had said. That was the second thing I filed. 31 years as a private investigator teaches you that the smallest decisions reveal the most durable patterns. A man who forgets to introduce his wife at a work event isn't distracted. He's making a calculation about what she's worth in that room. I filed it and said nothing more. Over the following 18 months, I watched the pattern repeat itself. Marcus working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays with increasing regularity. His phone face down on the table at family dinners, which started 3 years ago and escalated to face down in his pocket by last winter. Sarah calling me less frequently, not because things were better, but because she was spending more energy managing what she didn't want me to see. When she did call, she used the word busy to describe him the way people use the word fine to describe themselves. It covered a shape without naming it. Last spring, she told me he'd said she was being too heavy when she tried to talk to him about their schedule. That was the word he used. Heavy. I asked her what she said back. She told me she'd apologized. I didn't say anything about that. I made a note of it. 6 months ago, I called Patricia Chen. We'd worked together twice in the 90s. She was a junior attorney at a firm that handled asset litigation, and I'd done investigative work on 2 of her cases. She'd built her own practice since then, family law and financial disputes, offices on 17th Street. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I had a feeling. I told her I thought my son-in-law was building toward something, and I wanted to be ready before it arrived rather than after. She asked me what I had. I told her what I'd observed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Rob, that's instinct, not evidence." I said I knew. I told her to start building the file anyway. She agreed. We spent the next 3 weeks documenting what was already on paper, the joint accounts Sarah and Marcus held, the condo in Capitol Hill they'd purchased together 2 years ago, the business account Marcus had opened in both their names for a side consulting arrangement that Sarah had never fully understood. Patricia pulled the property records. She found 2 transfer inquiries on the Capitol Hill unit that Marcus had initiated and not disclosed. Neither had gone through. Both were dated within the past 8 months. 3 months ago, I called Danny Fuentes. We'd worked together for 11 years before he went independent surveillance. Skip tracing, the kind of patient documentation work that most people underestimate because it looks like waiting. I told him I needed eyes on Marcus Reed, Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting the following week. I told him to photograph everything and send me nothing by email. Danny called me 4 weeks later. He came to my house in Lakewood, sat at my kitchen table, and put a manila envelope in front of me. Inside were 43 photographs, a log of 7 separate meetings over 26 days, and a typed summary of locations twice at a hotel on Spear Boulevard, 3 times at an apartment building in the Highlands neighborhood, twice at a restaurant in Englewood where the booth in the back corner had no sightline from the entrance. The woman in the photographs was consistent across all 7 meetings. Danny had run her name from a vehicle registration. Vanessa Marks, 28, a leasing agent at one of the residential properties Marcus managed. I looked at the photographs for about 4 minutes. Then I closed the envelope and set it on the table. Danny asked me what I wanted to do next. I told him to keep the originals somewhere secure and send me a digital backup through the encrypted transfer we used to use on cases. He nodded. He'd worked with me long enough not to ask why I wasn't angrier. The truth is, I wasn't calm because I was indifferent. I was calm because being angry would have been a waste of the 6 months I had already invested. Anger moves fast and lands badly. What I had built, carefully and without Sarah's knowledge, was something that moved slowly and landed exactly where I aimed it. I called Patricia that evening. I told her we had what we needed. She said, "Do you want to move?" I said, "Not yet. We wait until he shows us what he intends to do with it." She understood. That was the thing about Patricia. She had been doing this long enough to know that the most dangerous version of a man like Marcus wasn't the one who was cheating. It was the one who had already decided what to do about the marriage and hadn't told his wife yet. We were going to let him tell us himself. 3 days after that phone call, Marcus told Sarah he wanted to talk about their future. She called me afterward. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, the kind of October day in Denver where the light goes flat and gray before 4 o'clock. I was at my desk reviewing a property assessment when my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring once before I picked up, not because I was hesitant, but because I wanted to hear her voice before she heard mine. She sounded like she was trying to keep her voice steady. She almost managed it. Marcus had sat her down at the kitchen table, their kitchen table, in the house they had bought together 3 years ago on Larimer Street, and told her he wanted to restructure their finances. His word, restructure. He wanted to transfer the house and their joint savings account into his name alone. He said it was about asset protection. He said his company was navigating a difficult project cycle, and having everything in a joint account created liability exposure. He said a financial advisor had recommended it. He had a folder on the table when he said it. He'd prepared. Sarah told him no. She told him she wasn't comfortable signing anything without understanding it fully, and that she'd want to talk to someone first. She said it calmly. She told me, because she thought it was a reasonable response to a reasonable request. She still believed, at that point, that there might be a reasonable explanation. Marcus set the folder down. He looked at her for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "If you won't agree, my father's attorneys will make this very difficult for you." She went quiet on the phone when she got to that part. I waited. "Dad," she said. He looked at me like I was a problem he was solving. Have you ever watched someone you love describe the moment they understood something they couldn't understand? There's a particular quality to the silence that follows. It doesn't ask for anything. It just sits there, taking up space that used to hold something else. I told her to listen carefully. I told her that what Marcus had just done was not a negotiation, it was a declaration, and I told her what I had not told her before, that I had been watching this situation for 6 months, that I had not been idle, and that she did not need to be afraid. She asked me what I meant. I said, "It means your father has been doing this work for a long time, and he did not sit down when you called him 3 months ago and do nothing." I told her Patricia Chen had been involved since August. I told her there were documents already in preparation. I told her that Marcus's declaration had not surprised me. It had been the thing I was waiting for him to make. She was quiet again. Then she said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to be ready." After we hung up, I called Patricia. It was just past 5 o'clock. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "He showed us asset transfer demand, verbal threat involving his father's legal team, all of it in front of her at the kitchen table." Patricia said, "That's step 1 confirmed. Do you want to activate?" I said, "Activate step 1. She said she'd have David Lee contacted by morning. David Lee had been a notary and document examiner for 31 years. We had worked together twice during my years as a private investigator, once on a fraudulent estate transfer in 2009, once on a contested property deed in 2014. He was 60 years old, meticulous in a way that made other meticulous people feel careless, and he had the particular gift of being entirely unimpressed by confident men presenting paperwork. Patricia had already pulled every legal document connected to Sarah and Marcus's shared assets. The house on Larimer Street, the joint savings account at Mountain West Federal, the vehicle titles, the LLC Sarah had registered for her interior design business 2 years ago. David called me at 9:17 the following morning. I was at the kitchen table with coffee I hadn't touched yet. He said, "Rob, there's a quitclaim deed here for the Larimer Street property. It's dated 8 weeks ago. Sarah's signature is on it." I said, "Is it her signature?" He said, "The signature is hers, but the notarization is not from anyone in her county. It's from a notary in Aurora, and the document was never filed. It's sitting in the stack Patricia pulled from the joint filing box Marcus had at his office." He paused. "She didn't know about this document, did she?" It wasn't a question. I said, "No." He said, "Then someone obtained her signature on a transfer document without disclosing its purpose, and then held the document unfiled, presumably until a more useful moment." Another pause. "Rob, that's not a gray area. That's legal fraud. I can certify this document as fraudulently obtained and provide a sworn statement to that effect." I said, "I'll need you as a witness." He said, "I know, I've already started the affidavit." The coffee was cold by the time I set the phone down. I drank it anyway. Then I opened the second file, the one my contact at a financial forensics firm had sent over the previous week. Marcus had been moving money. Not carelessly, he wasn't careless. I'll give him that. Small transfers, irregular intervals, different stated purposes. But over 14 months, the total came to $47,000. All of it had moved from the joint savings account into a personal account registered under a name I recognized from the phone records Patricia had obtained through the civil subpoena process, Vanessa Marks. $47,000, transferred in fragments small enough to avoid automatic flags, spread across 14 months, to a woman he had been meeting at the Marriott on Colorado Boulevard every second or third week since the previous November. I had been waiting 6 months for Marcus to show me exactly what kind of man he was. He had now shown me twice in 48 hours. The quitclaim deed was step 1. David Lee's affidavit was the foundation. The financial transfer records were the second wall going up. Patricia had the civil subpoena documentation and a draft injunction ready to file the moment I gave her the word. Marcus believed he was managing a situation. He had prepared a folder. He had made a threat. He believed Sarah was isolated and that I was a 62-year-old retired investigator who would show up at a holiday dinner and be politely managed. What he had not accounted for was that I had spent 30 years learning exactly how men like him prepared and exactly what they left behind when they did. I didn't call Sarah again that night. There was nothing she needed to know yet that would help her, and several things she needed not to know yet so that her reactions would remain genuine. That sounds colder than it was. I knew my daughter. If she knew the full shape of what I had, she would confront Marcus before the time was right. She would give him the chance to move things, destroy things, lawyer up with his father's team before we had sealed every exit. The kindest thing I could do for her was to let her believe, for a little while longer, that this was still a situation that might resolve itself. It wasn't, but Marcus didn't know that yet either. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, not the middle of the night this time. Sarah's voice was different from the 2 version, less raw, more controlled, which in some ways was worse. Controlled fear has had time to settle into the bones. He had someone come to the house, she said. A man with a briefcase. Marcus introduced him as a colleague. They went into the study and closed the door for 40 minutes. I asked if she knew the man's name. Gerald Fitch. I saw it on his card afterward. It was on the kitchen counter. Marcus must have left it there by accident. I wrote the name down on the notepad I keep beside the phone. Gerald Fitch. I recognized it. Fitch had a family law practice in Cherry Creek, not the kind of attorney you brought in to discuss a development project. He specialized in asset division. I had seen his name on opposing counsel filings twice in my years doing investigative work, and both times the settlements had been structured to leave one party with very little and the other with almost everything. Marcus hadn't left that card by accident. I asked Sarah how she was feeling. Scared, she said. He told me last night that we need to talk about the future. He said it like it was a business meeting, like we were going to renegotiate a contract. That was exactly what Marcus thought he was doing. 2 days later, she called again. Her voice had gone flat in the way that happens when someone has been crying for a long time and has run out of the energy for it. He showed me a document, she said. He said it was a preliminary divorce agreement. He said his attorney had prepared it and that it was standard. She paused. Dad, it gives me 15%. 15% of the marital assets, 4 years of her life. Her income folded into their joint accounts while she built her client base. The studio space she had converted in their basement with her own hands, 15%. He said if I didn't sign, his father's legal team would file a claim against me for neglect of marital duties. He used that phrase, neglect of marital duties. He said they had documentation. I let the silence sit for a moment. Outside my window, the Rockies were catching the last of the afternoon light, the kind of copper and gray that Denver gets in October when the air is thin and everything looks sharper than it is. Then Sarah said, "There's something else." Her voice had changed, not lower, but tighter, the way a voice gets when the thing being described is still recent enough to feel like it's happening. He did it in front of someone, she said. The woman from next door, Mrs. Alvarez, she was dropping off a package that had been left on our porch by mistake. She rang the bell right in the middle of it. Marcus opened the door, and she handed him the box, and I was standing there in the hallway. And he kept going. He said it again, about the neglect claim, about his father's attorneys. Right there, with the door open, she heard all of it. I said, "Did she say anything?" "She looked at me," Sarah said. "She looked at me the way you look at someone when you want to help and you don't know how." And then Marcus thanked her for the package and closed the door and went back to the kitchen like nothing had happened. I wrote the name down. Elena Alvarez. Sarah had mentioned her before, a retired school teacher who had lived on that block for 19 years. I had met her once, briefly, at a block association event 2 summers ago. She had struck me as the kind of woman who paid attention and remembered what she saw. "Does she know you well?" I asked. "We have coffee sometimes," Sarah said. "She checks on me." "Good," I said. "Don't tell her anything yet. Just don't avoid her." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because a witness who comes forward on her own carries more weight than one who is asked," I said. "And because what she heard today is exactly the kind of thing a court needs to hear from someone who had no reason to be listening." I called Patricia that evening and added Elena Alvarez to the witness list. Patricia said, That's the kind of corroboration that turns a financial fraud case into something a judge remembers. I told her I knew. I told her to hold it for the hearing. Sarah, I said, listen to me carefully. Do not sign anything. Do not respond to any document in writing. If Marcus or his attorney contacts you again, you tell them your representation is handling it. I don't have representation. You do now. You just don't know her name yet. She was quiet for a long moment. Dad, what have you been doing? I've been waiting, I said. 6 months of waiting. And I've been collecting. He committed fraud on your joint finances. He's been with another woman, and now he's threatening you with fabricated legal claims. That's 3 separate categories of misconduct. I have documentation on all 3. I paused. Tell me you understand what I'm saying. I understand, she said, and for the first time since the 2 a.m. call, something in her voice changed. Not relief exactly, but the particular steadiness that comes when a person realizes they are not alone in a room they thought was empty. I'm going to activate the next step, I told her. You'll hear from Patricia Chen by tomorrow morning. I hung up and sat with the notepad for a minute. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the financial analysis I had commissioned 3 weeks earlier from a forensic accountant named Dennis Haverford, who had done work for my firm for 11 years and whose methodology had been accepted as evidence in 4 separate federal proceedings. The report was 41 pages. The relevant section was page 12. Over a 14-month period, Marcus had made 17 transfers from the joint savings account to a secondary account registered in a name I recognized, Vanessa Marks. The transfers were structured to stay below the threshold that would trigger automatic bank reporting. They totaled $47,000. Under Colorado marital property law, those transfers constituted unauthorized dissipation of marital assets. It wasn't just infidelity, it was financial fraud. Documented, time-stamped, and traceable to the penny. Dennis had flagged 3 of the transfers as particularly significant. They had occurred within 72 hours of large deposits Sarah had made from client payments. Marcus had been waiting for her money to clear before moving his. I had read that section 4 times. Each time I read it, I thought about the studio in the basement. I thought about the clients she had built over 3 years, the referrals. The late nights I knew she worked because she would sometimes text me at 11 asking if a particular shade of gray read as warm or cold in photographs. She had been building something real. He had been taking from it in small pieces while she was building it. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse on Colfax, not to file anything, not yet. Judge Harold Westbrook had been on the family court bench for 22 years. I had appeared before him 3 times in the course of my investigative work, twice as a witness, once to present documentary evidence in a custody matter, and I had found him to be a man who read documents the way I did slowly, twice, with the particular attention of someone who knows that the important thing is never the sentence. It's the sentence beneath it. His clerk, a woman named Donna who had been in that office for 14 years, recognized me when I came in. She said the judge had a window at 11:30. I waited in the hallway. The building smelled like old paper and the particular dry heat of government buildings in October. Judge Westbrook shook my hand when I came in and gestured to the chair across from his desk. He looked the same as I remembered, heavier around the jaw, but the eyes were the same, the kind of gray that doesn't change with age. "Robert," he said, "it's been a while." "It has," I said. "I have a matter that will likely come before your court within the next 30 days. I wanted to make sure you understood its character before it arrived." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." "My daughter is being presented with a divorce agreement that offers her 15% of marital assets, while her husband retains 85%. The agreement was prepared by an attorney named Gerald Fitch, who my son-in-law retained without my daughter's knowledge. My son-in-law has also made $47,000 in unauthorized transfers from their joint account to a third party, and I have a forensic financial report documenting every transaction. I set the executive summary 4 pages, not the full report, on his desk. He has additionally threatened my daughter with fabricated claims of marital neglect if she refuses to sign. Judge Westbrook picked up the summary. He read the first page without expression, then the second. He set it down and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You said you have the full report. 41 pages, prepared by Dennis Haverford. He nodded once. He knew the name. Bring it when you file, he said. I'll want to see the transfer records alongside the account statements. They're already cross-referenced. He looked at me for a moment. Your daughter, is she safe? She is. She doesn't know the full scope of what I have yet. I'm managing the timing. He nodded again, slowly. Then bring it when you're ready. He paused. Fitch is competent, but he's not careful. If the transfers are documented the way you're describing, he's going to have a problem defending that agreement. I stood up, picked up the summary, and shook his hand again. Walking back to my car, I counted the steps from the courthouse door to the parking structure. 47, the same number as the transfers. I didn't think that meant anything, but I noted it anyway. Old habit from the years when I was paid to notice things that other people walked past without looking at. Marcus had spent 6 months building what he thought was an airtight case. He had an attorney. He had a document. He had leverage, or what he believed was leverage. What he didn't have was any idea that I had been building something too longer, quieter, and considerably more permanent. Sarah called me at 7:14 that evening. Not to, this time, but the sound in her voice was the same as it had been 6 months ago when she first called me in the dark. That particular sound doesn't change with the hour. I recognized it the way you recognize weather coming in over the mountains before the sky shows you anything. She said Marcus had called her that afternoon. He had given her 48 hours to sign the divorce agreement his attorney had drafted, the one that awarded him the house on Birchwood, the joint investment account, and a lien against her design business for what he called shared startup costs. She said he told her that if she didn't sign, he would file suit, and that by the time his attorney was finished, she would have nothing. Not the house, not the business, not the savings she had built before they were married. Nothing. She repeated that word, nothing, the way people repeat a word when they are trying to understand how it was said to them. I was standing in the kitchen. The window over the sink faces west, and the last of the light was going orange over the ridgeline. I watched it for a moment before I answered. Did he say anything else? I asked. She was quiet for a second. He said he was doing me a favor, that I should thank him for giving me 48 hours instead of just filing. I set down the glass I'd been holding. All right, sweetheart. Don't sign anything. Don't respond to him tonight. Go to sleep if you can. Dad, I know. I said, I've been waiting for this. There was a pause. What does that mean? It means I'm going to make a phone call, and after that, everything happens the way it was always going to happen. After we hung up, I stood at the window for another minute. The light had gone from orange to a flat gray blue. In 31 years as a private investigator, 22 of them running my own firm, I had learned that the moment a person makes a threat with a deadline, they have told you two things. First, that they are afraid. Second, that they have decided to stop being careful. Both of those things were useful to me. I called Patricia. She picked up on the second ring. She always picked up on the second ring. In 4 years of working together, I had never once reached her voicemail. He gave her 48 hours. I said, I heard, she said. His attorney sent a courtesy copy to my office this afternoon. I've been waiting for your call. Tomorrow morning, I said. 10 o'clock. I want to send the email. A brief silence, not hesitation. Patricia Chen did not hesitate. It was the silence of a person confirming the weight of what they are about to do. Everything is ready, she said. The packet is complete, 47 pages. Walk me through it one more time. She did. The photographs came first, 14 of them, time-stamped, taken outside the apartment on Larimer Street that Marcus had been renting under a name that was not his own. Vanessa Marks appeared in 11 of those photographs. In 3 of them, Marcus appeared with her. The photographs had been taken over a period of 4 months by a licensed investigator I had hired in February, 3 weeks after Sarah first called me at 2 a.m. Then the messages. 43 text exchanges recovered from a cloud backup that Marcus had forgotten was linked to a shared family account he and Sarah had set up 2 years ago. The one I had found when I was helping Sarah troubleshoot her phone the previous November, 6 weeks before she knew anything was wrong. I had noted the backup then. I had said nothing. I had simply written down the access credentials in the small notebook I keep in my jacket pocket. And I had waited. The message Patricia quoted to me was the one I had read 11 times since February. It read, "I love you. Sarah is just a wife on paper. She's been that for a year." Then the financial records. $47,000 moved in 7 transfers over 8 months from the joint account Marcus shared with Sarah into a personal account she didn't know existed. The transfers were documented. The receiving account was documented. The purpose listed on 3 of the transfers' consulting fees was documented as false because the company listed as the consulting recipient had been dissolved 14 months earlier. Patricia had obtained that dissolution record through a standard business registry search. It had taken her 11 minutes. Then the legal documents. The prenuptial addendum that Marcus had presented to Sarah 14 months ago, telling her it was a standard amendment their original attorney had recommended. Sarah had signed it. What Marcus had not told her was that the original attorney had not drafted it, had not recommended it, and had not seen it. It had been prepared by a different firm, one that had since been the subject of a bar complaint in 2 counties. The addendum, if it stood, would have entitled Marcus to 60% of any asset Sarah held at the time of divorce, including the business she had built entirely on her own before they were married. That document was the reason I had called Patricia in the first place, not the photographs, not the messages, the document. Because in 31 years of investigations, I had learned that photographs prove what a person did, messages prove what a person said, but documents prove what a person planned. The email goes to 4 addresses, I said. 5, Patricia said. We added the Colorado Real Estate Commission last week. Given the fraud component in the financial transfers, they have jurisdiction over his license. 5, I said. His employer's compliance office, his parents' home address. His father is still a named partner at the development firm, so it goes to the firm as well. The 2 journalists who cover real estate fraud for the Post, and the clerk of the family court, with a courtesy copy to Judge Westbrook's office, since the hearing is scheduled for 10:15. 10:15. The email would arrive 15 minutes before Marcus sat down in that courtroom in front of Judge Harold Westbrook, believing he was about to watch Sarah sign away everything she had. He would sit down, he would open his phone, or someone near him would open theirs. And by the time the clerk called his name, every person in that room who mattered would already know what was in those 47 pages. I had not designed it to humiliate him. I want to be clear about that. I had designed it to be complete, to leave no path out, no version of events he could reconstruct, no story he could tell afterward that would hold together. Humiliation was not the point. Permanence was the point. 10 o'clock, I said. I'll send it myself, Patricia said, from my firm's address, so there's no question about the chain of custody. Thank you, Patricia. Mr. Caldwell, she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. I've been practicing family law for 26 years. I don't often get to send an email like this one. After I hung up, I went to my desk and opened the folder I had been keeping since February. The original notebook was there, the small one with the access credentials written in my handwriting on the 3rd page. Beneath it was a printed copy of every document Patricia had assembled, organized by category, indexed by date. 47 pages, the same number as the transfers, the same number of steps from the courthouse door to the parking structure. I closed the folder, turned off the desk lamp, and went to make coffee, the kind you make slowly, when you have time, because you have done everything that can be done, and what remains is simply waiting for morning. The courthouse on Colfax Avenue smelled the way it always did, floor wax and recycled air, and something faintly metallic that I had never been able to identify in 30 years of walking through its doors. I had been in this building 11 times in my career as an investigator, twice as an expert witness, and once to file a civil complaint that took 4 years to resolve. This morning was different from all of those. This morning, I was a father. I arrived at 9:14. The hearing was scheduled for 10:00. I wanted the extra time. The courtroom assigned to Judge Westbrook was on the 3rd floor, end of the corridor, last door on the left. I had been inside it once before, 3 weeks ago, when Patricia arranged a brief procedural appearance that required my signature on a single document. That visit had taken 11 minutes. I had used those 11 minutes to count the rows of gallery seating, 6 rows, 8 seats per row, and to note that the acoustics carried clearly from the respondent's table to the back row. I sat in the back row now, 2nd seat from the aisle, and I set my briefcase on the floor beside my left foot. Patricia was already at the petitioner's table when I arrived. She had a yellow legal pad, a black pen, and a second folder, the one I had given her 4 days ago, the one she had reviewed twice and described to me, in her careful way, as comprehensive. She did not look up when I sat down. She knew I was there. We had agreed that morning, over the phone at 7:15, that there was nothing left to discuss. Have you ever sat in a room and known exactly what was coming, while the person sitting 20 feet away from you knew nothing? That particular kind of stillness is unlike any other. It is not peace. It is not calm. It is something closer to the moment before a controlled demolition, when the structure is already compromised, the charges are already set, and all that remains is the signal. Sarah came in at 9:41. She walked with her shoulders slightly forward, the way she had walked since she was a child when she was carrying something heavy. She sat beside Patricia without looking at me. I had asked her, the night before, not to look at me during the proceeding. She had asked why. I told her she would understand before noon. She had not slept. I could tell from the way she held her coffee cup, both hands, fingers wrapped all the way around it, the way she had held things since she was 6 years old and the world felt too large. Marcus came in at 9:52 with his attorney, a man named Garrett Holloway who had a reputation in Denver real estate circles for being aggressive and thorough. Holloway carried a leather portfolio and moved with the particular confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Marcus moved the same way. He was wearing a gray suit. I recognized he had worn it to Sarah's 30th birthday dinner 2 years ago, when he had given a toast about their future that had made everyone at the table applaud. I had not applauded. I had watched his hands while he spoke. His hands were the same now as they had been then, steady, controlled, touching nothing unnecessarily. He sat at the respondent's table without looking at me. Then he looked at me. I was watching the far wall. I did not move. Holloway leaned close and said something I could not fully hear. Marcus smiled. Then Marcus said, at a volume that carried, and I want to be precise about this, because I had been waiting 6 months for him to make exactly this kind of mistake. By the time we're done this morning, she won't have anything left to fight with. The property, the accounts, all of it. Her father thinks he knows something. He doesn't know what I've already moved. He said it to Holloway, but he said it loud enough. He had been doing that for months. I realized speaking just loudly enough, in rooms just public enough, because he had never once believed he could be held accountable. Sarah's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Patricia wrote something on her legal pad. I looked at my watch. It was 9:58. I said quietly to no one in particular, 2 more minutes. Patricia did not look up. She said, equally quietly, everything's in. I had filed the documents at 7:40 that morning through the electronic submission portal the court had implemented 2 years ago. The submission had been confirmed at 7:43. Patricia had received the confirmation at 7:44 and forwarded it to Judge Westbrook's clerk at 7:46. The clerk's name was Daniel Reyes, and he had been in that position for 8 years. I knew this because I had verified it before we filed. I verify things. It is a habit that has never once failed me. The door at the front of the courtroom opened at 10:01. Judge Harold Westbrook was 68 years old, and he had been on the family court bench in Denver for 22 years. He moved without urgency. He sat down, opened a folder, looked at it for a moment, and then looked up at the room. He looked at Marcus first, then at Sarah, then briefly at me. I had met Judge Westbrook once, professionally, in 2009 during a deposition in a fraud case where I had served as an investigative consultant. He had not remembered me at the procedural appearance 3 weeks ago, and I had not reminded him. This morning, something in his expression told me that Daniel Reyes had done his job. Westbrook adjusted his glasses. He said, "Before we begin the scheduled proceeding, I need to address some materials that were submitted to this court this morning." He paused. "Mr. Holloway, I assume your client has not been informed of this submission." Holloway looked up from his portfolio. "Your Honor, I'm not sure what you're referring to." "I'm referring," Westbrook said, "to a 47-page evidentiary package submitted at 7:40 this morning, which includes documentation of fraudulent asset transfers, unauthorized account activity, and electronic correspondence that is directly relevant to the marital estate under consideration today." He set the folder down. "Before any agreements are signed, this court will need to address the contents of that submission." The room was quiet, not the quiet of people being polite, the quiet of people recalibrating. Marcus said, "What documents?" His voice was the same volume it had been 2 minutes ago, but something in it was different. The steadiness was still there, but it was working harder now. Westbrook looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "Documents pertaining to fraudulent transfer of marital assets, unauthorized financial transactions, and a pattern of conduct that, if substantiated, would materially alter the terms of any settlement reached in this proceeding." He closed the folder. "Mr. Reed, I would strongly recommend that you consult with your attorney before saying anything further." Holloway had already put his hand on Marcus's arm. I watched Marcus's face from the back row. I had spent 6 months watching his face in photographs, in surveillance footage, in the still frames Patricia had extracted from the hotel security files. I knew what his controlled expression looked like. I knew what it looked like when the control was real and when it was performance. What I saw now was neither. What I saw now was a man who had built his entire position on the assumption that no one had been paying attention. He had been wrong about that from the beginning. Sarah did not turn around. She was looking straight ahead, both hands still around the coffee cup, and I could see from the angle of her shoulders that she was breathing carefully the way she had learned to breathe when she was 17 and her mother was sick and the world required steadiness from her before she was ready to give it. She was ready now. She had been ready since the night she called me at 2 a.m, and I had answered before the second ring. And she had said one word in a voice I had not heard since her mother's funeral. She had said, "Dad." And I had already been reaching for the notebook. Patricia Chen set her second folder on the table at 9:04 a.m. I know the time because I was watching the clock on the wall above Judge Westbrook's bench, an old institutional piece, black hands on white, the kind that moves in visible ticks rather than a smooth sweep. I'd been counting those ticks for 23 minutes while Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a man named Greg Hollis, who had a reputation in Denver family court for aggressive pretrial maneuvering and a particular skill at making financial fraud look like miscommunication. Hollis had been talking quietly to Marcus for most of those 23 minutes. Marcus had been nodding. He had the particular posture of a man who believes the room belongs to him, shoulders back, chin level, one hand resting open on the table as though he were waiting for someone to hand him something he'd already earned. Patricia set the folder down without looking at Marcus. She pulled her chair back, sat, and opened her legal pad to a page that was already covered in handwriting. Marcus leaned slightly toward Hollis and said something I could not hear. Then he turned his head toward the respondent's table, not toward Patricia, toward Sarah, and said, at the same caring volume he had used before, "She doesn't have anything. Her father's been retired for 3 years. Whatever he thinks he found, my attorney has already accounted for it." The room did not react. Patricia did not look up from her legal pad. I said, From the back row, quietly and without raising my voice, "You should check your phone, Marcus." He turned. He looked at me. I was looking at the clock above Judge Westbrook's bench. He said, "What?" I said, "The email went out at 8:45 to 5 addresses. Check your phone." Hollis put his hand on Marcus's arm. Marcus did not move for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and looked at his screen. I watched his face from 40 feet away, and I counted 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And then I watched the open-handed posture leave his body entirely, the way air leaves a room when a window closes. He put the phone back in his pocket. He said nothing. Judge Westbrook entered at 10:01. She had been my attorney for 6 years, and in that time I had watched her walk into rooms where the other side had every apparent advantage, and I had never once seen her rush. She pulled her chair back, sat, and opened her legal pad to a page that was already covered in handwriting. Then she looked at Judge Westbrook and said, "Your Honor, the respondent has additional materials to submit before we proceed." Hollis looked up. "We weren't notified of additional materials." Patricia said, "You were page 4 of the motion filed Thursday, Exhibit C." Hollis opened his own folder. There was a pause. Judge Harold Westbrook, who had been on the family court bench in Denver for 19 years and had the particular stillness of a man who had heard every version of every argument and had stopped being surprised by any of them, removed his reading glasses from his breast pocket and put them on. He looked at Patricia. He said, "Proceed." Patricia stood and walked to the clerk's station. She handed a USB drive to the clerk, a young woman named Angela Reyes, who had been processing documents in that courtroom for 4 years. Angela inserted the drive, opened the file, and turned her monitor so it faced the room. Then Patricia said, "Your Honor, the respondent submits Exhibit C, which contains 47 pages of documented correspondence, financial records, and photographic evidence relevant to the petitioner's conduct during the marriage." The wall screen at the front of the room came on. Marcus turned to look at it. His hand was still open on the table. Judge Westbrook read the first page without expression. He read it a second time. Then he turned to the second page, and I watched his jaw settle into a position I recognized from the 2 previous times I had appeared before him, a slight tightening at the corners. The look of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected but had hoped was not true. He read aloud, in the flat, even tone he used for all evidentiary recitation, text message from Marcus Reed to Vanessa Marks, dated February 9th, quote, "I love you. Sarah is just a wife on paper. When I have the house and the money, I'll leave her." End quote. He set the page down. Bank transfer record $47,000 moved from the Reed joint account to an account registered to Vanessa Marks, occurring in 11 separate transactions between October and March. He turned to the next page. Photographic evidence, Marcus Reed and Vanessa Marks, Riverside Hotel, March 15th, 11:18 p.m. Marcus stood up. He said, That's fabricated. That's..." Judge Westbrook said, "Sit down, Mr. Reed." The room was very quiet. Marcus sat. His hand was no longer open on the table. He had both hands in his lap, and he was looking at Hollis. And Hollis was looking at the screen with an expression I had seen once before on a structural engineer I'd worked with in 1998, the moment he understood that the load-bearing calculations he'd trusted had been wrong from the start. Hollis stood. He said, "Your Honor, I was not made aware of these materials prior to this proceeding. I have not had the opportunity to review them with my client, and I cannot in good conscience continue to represent Mr. Reed without that review." He picked up his legal pad, his pen, and his folder. He looked at Marcus once briefly, the way you look at a door you are closing, and he walked out of the courtroom. The door swung shut behind him with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Marcus watched him go. Then he turned back to the room. He was alone at the plaintiff's table, and the wall screen was still on, and the 47 pages were still there. Judge Westbrook did not pause. He continued reading. "The court has also received documentation that Mr. Reed signed a property transfer instrument on November 3rd without the knowledge or consent of the respondent, Sarah Caldwell Reed. This constitutes fraud under Colorado statute. He turned another page. Additionally, the financial records submitted confirm that Mr. Reed transferred funds from the marital joint account to a third-party account on 9 separate occasions between August and February in amounts totaling $63,400. This constitutes a violation of Colorado Community Property Statute. He set the last page down and looked at Marcus over the rim of his glasses. Mr. Reed, do you wish to address the court? Marcus said, I don't know where that email came from. I didn't send it. Judge Westbrook said, the court has a witness prepared to authenticate the correspondence. He looked toward the gallery. Mr. Lee. David Lee stood from the third row. He was a notary and digital forensics consultant who had been in practice in Denver for 14 years, and I had hired him 8 weeks ago on Patricia's recommendation. He was a quiet man who wore a gray suit and carried a single manila folder, and he walked to the witness stand with the unhurried movement of someone who had testified before many times and found the process unremarkable. He was sworn in. Patricia asked 3 questions. David answered each one in a sentence, citing the metadata analysis, the server logs, and the chain of custody documentation he had prepared. When she asked whether the messages in Exhibit C were authentic, he said, yes. The forensic analysis confirms origin, timestamp, and unaltered content. He sat back down. Marcus said, I want to speak to my attorney. Judge Westbrook said, your attorney has left the proceeding. You may request a continuance to retain new counsel. I want a continuance. Denied. You filed this petition on an expedited timeline. Mr. Reed, the court accommodated that timeline. We will proceed. Judge Westbrook removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at Marcus directly. Based on the evidence before this court, the petitioner's proposed settlement agreement is rejected in its entirety. The court will instead approve the respondent's proposed agreement, filed March 28th, under which Mr. Reed will return all funds transferred from the joint account, plus a penalty of 20%, and the respondent will retain 80% of the marital assets, including the residence at 4417 Larimer Street. He picked up his pen. In addition, this court is referring the fraudulent transfer documentation and the property instrument to the Denver District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. Marcus said, No, I'll appeal. Judge Westbrook signed the order. He said, without looking up, you have every right to appeal. Mr. Reed, before you do, you should be aware that this court transmitted the evidentiary packet to the following parties at 8:45 this morning, Pinnacle Development Group, where you're currently employed as senior project manager, your parents, Richard and Carol Reed, at their address of record, and your 3 listed business partners in the Millbrook Avenue project. He set down his pen. You may want to contact them before you contact an appellate attorney. The air in the room changed. Marcus turned in his chair. He looked at Sarah, who was sitting at the respondent's table with her hands folded in front of her and her eyes forward. He looked at Patricia, who was writing on her legal pad without looking up. He looked at David Lee, who had returned to his seat in the gallery and was reviewing his own notes. He looked at Angela Reyes at the clerk's station, who was printing the signed order. He looked at the 2 court officers standing by the door. Then he looked toward the back of the room. I was sitting in the last row, on the aisle. I had been there since 8:40, before Marcus arrived, before his attorney arrived, before anyone from his side had walked through that door. I had my jacket on and my hands in my lap, and I was looking at the middle distance, not at Marcus, not at the screen, not at the bench. I had been watching the clock above Judge Westbrook's head, and I had been counting the ticks. And I had been thinking about a phone call at 2 in the morning, 6 months and 11 days ago, and a single word spoken in a voice I recognized from the worst night of my life, and the notebook I had reached for before she finished saying it. I had been waiting for this moment for 6 months. Not for the anger of it. I had moved past the anger in the first week, somewhere between the 3rd page of notes and the second conversation with Patricia. What I had been waiting for was the specific, irreversible moment when every door Marcus had been counting on closed at once, and he understood that none of them would open again. Not the job, not the house, not the money he had moved, not the settlement he had drafted, not the attorney who had walked out, not the partners who were, at that exact moment, reading an email they had received 40 minutes ago. I had ended it permanently, not in anger, not in haste, in the only way that cannot be undone through documentation, through patience, through the quiet accumulation of facts that speak for themselves in rooms where facts are the only currency that matters. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. I did not look away. I did not speak. There was nothing left to say, and I had known that since November, when I first sat across from Patricia in her office on the 14th floor and told her what I had found, and she had opened her legal pad and said, without any particular emotion, "Then we have work to do." We had done the work. Marcus turned back to the front of the room. His shoulders had changed. The posture was gone, the open hand, the level chin, the performance of a man waiting to receive what he had already claimed. He was sitting the way people sit when they understand that the ground they were standing on was not ground at all, and that the fall has already begun, and that there is no version of the next 5 minutes that ends differently than this one. Judge Westbrook gathered his papers. He said, "Court is adjourned." He stood, and the room stood with him, and he walked through the door behind the bench, and the door closed, and the wall screen went dark. Sarah did not look back at me. She picked up her bag, said something quietly to Patricia, and walked toward the clerk's station to collect the signed order. Patricia closed her legal pad, capped her pen, and looked across the room at me once, a brief level look that meant exactly what it was intended to mean, which was that the work was finished and the work had held. I stood, picked up my jacket from the seat beside me, and walked out through the main door. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights were the same as they always are in courthouses, flat and indifferent and very bright. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Behind me, I could hear the courtroom door opening again, and footsteps, and then nothing. I did not turn around. The elevator arrived, I stepped in, and the doors closed, and I rode down alone. The letter from Meridian Property Group arrived on a Tuesday. I know because Sarah called me that afternoon, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with the same cup of coffee I'd poured at 7 that morning, still half full and long cold. She didn't say much. She said Marcus had called her not to apologize, not to explain, but to tell her that she had done this to him. That was the phrase he used. She told me she hung up after 4 seconds. I told her that was 3 seconds longer than necessary. The termination letter, as Patricia later confirmed, cited conduct inconsistent with company values and fiduciary responsibility to clients. Meridian had been watching Marcus for 11 months before the courthouse. What happened in Judge Westbrook's courtroom gave them the documented predicate they needed to act without exposure to a wrongful termination claim. His access badge was deactivated before he reached the parking garage. A colleague named Darnell Hutchins, who had worked alongside Marcus for 4 years and who testified in a deposition 6 weeks earlier about certain irregularities in project accounts, told Patricia afterward that the office had been quiet all day. He said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite, that it had been very quiet, and that the quiet was a relief. By the following Friday, 2 development partnerships Marcus had been cultivating for the better part of a year had formally withdrawn. One sent a 1-paragraph letter, the other sent nothing at all, which Patricia said was more final. The referral network Marcus had spent 7 years building in Denver's mid-market real estate sector does not forgive public court records. That is not cruelty. That is simply how the industry functions, and Marcus had always known it. He had counted on never being the subject of those records. His mother called him 8 days after the hearing. I know this because Sarah told me. And Sarah knew because Marcus told her in a voicemail she did not return for 3 days. His mother's name is Diane Reed. She is 63 years old and lives in Colorado Springs and had, by Marcus's own account in earlier conversations with Sarah, always believed her son was the most capable person in any room he entered. What she said to him on that call, Sarah relayed to me in pieces, because Sarah had finally listened to the voicemail and written down what Marcus quoted. Diane told him she could not protect him. She told him he had done something wrong, and that she had raised him to know the difference, and that she was sorry he had forgotten it. She did not say she stopped loving him, but she did not say she was proud of him, either. And for Marcus, who had built his entire self-image on his mother's confidence in him, the absence of those words was its own verdict. Vanessa Marks had already left Denver by the time the hearing concluded. Her apartment on Colfax was empty. She had given notice 2 weeks before the courthouse and moved to Portland. Patricia confirmed, through the financial review, that 3 of the wire transfers Marcus had routed through the secondary account had Vanessa's name as co-signatory, not because she initiated them, but because Marcus had told her they were contractor payments for a legitimate project. The liability, had Patricia not intervened, would have landed on her entirely. I did not look further than that. What Marcus had done to Vanessa was a different kind of damage than what he had done to Sarah, but it was damage, and it was his. Sarah called me on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the hearing. It was just past 9 o'clock. I was at the kitchen table with coffee I had actually remembered to drink while it was still warm, which felt like a small and specific improvement over the previous 6 months. I could hear the studio in the background when she called the particular quality of sound in that room. The way silence sits differently among fabric samples and drafting tables, and the low hum of the space heater she kept running from October through April. She had been in there since early morning. I knew because she had texted me at 7:12 with a question about whether a particular shade of sage read as warm or cool in north-facing light. I had told her warm. She had sent back a photograph of a swatch pinned to a corkboard, and I had looked at it for a moment and thought she is already building again. She said, "I want to tell you something before I lose my nerve." I said, "All right." A pause. I heard her set something down, a mug, I think, on the wooden surface of the drafting table. "I've been thinking about what you did," she said. "Not just the documents and the attorneys. All of it. The 6 months. The notebook. The fact that you were ready before I even knew there was something to be ready for." Another pause. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this without it sounding like something from a greeting card." "Take your time," I said. "You saved me," she said. "I know that's the greeting card version, but I don't know another way to say it. That's true." I let a moment pass. The light through my kitchen window was the flat, clear kind that Denver gets on late November mornings, no warmth in it, but very bright, the kind that shows you everything exactly as it is. "I didn't save you," I said. "I made sure the truth was visible. The truth did the rest." She was quiet for a while. I heard the space heater. I heard her breathing slow down from the careful, controlled pace it had held for most of the past 3 weeks into something more like ordinary breathing, the kind that doesn't require effort. "I understand the difference," she said finally. "I know you do," I said. "That's why I said it." After we hung up, I sat at the table for a while. The coffee was still warm. I finished it. Her apartment on Colfax was empty. I confirmed this through a contact I'd maintained from my years doing investigative work. A property manager named George Sy, who had no reason to withhold the information and every reason to be straightforward with me. Vanessa had given 30 days' notice 2 weeks before the courthouse. She moved to Portland. I did not look further than that, and I had no reason to. What Patricia uncovered during the financial review told a different story about Vanessa than the one Marcus had been performing for 6 months. 3 of the wire transfers that Marcus had routed through a secondary account had Vanessa's name attached as a co-signatory, not because she had initiated them, but because Marcus had needed a second signature and had told her they were contractor payments for a legitimate project. She had signed because she trusted him. The account was in her name. The liability, had Patricia not intervened at the document stage, would have landed on her entirely. Vanessa Marks was 28 years old and had believed a man who knew exactly how to be believed. That is a different kind of damage than the one Marcus intended to inflict on Sarah, but it is damage nonetheless, and it is permanent in its own way. I did not feel satisfaction about what happened to her. I felt something closer to recognition, the understanding that Marcus had not been running one deception, but several, and that each of them required a person willing to trust him. He had found those people efficiently and used them completely. That is a specific kind of intelligence, and it is entirely without conscience. Sarah called me on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the hearing. She was in her studio. I could hear the particular silence of that space. The way sound sits differently in a room full of fabric samples and drafting tables. She said she wanted to tell me something before she lost her nerve. I waited. She said, "Thank you. Dad, you saved me." I let a moment pass. Then I told her the truth, which was that I had not saved her. I told her I had made sure the truth was visible, and that the truth had done the rest. She was quiet for a while after that. Then she said she understood the difference, and I believed her, because Sarah has always been precise about language when it matters. The settlement gave her 82% of the jointly held assets, the house on Garfield Street, and the studio equipment she had purchased with her own income before the marriage. Marcus retained his personal vehicle and a savings account that had been in his name prior to the wedding. Patricia called the outcome clean. I called it accurate. Those are not the same word, but in this case, they pointed to the same result. What Marcus lost is not reducible to a balance sheet, though the balance sheet is damaging enough. He lost the architecture of a life he had been constructing for years, the professional reputation, the family confidence, the social position that comes from being the kind of man other men in his industry wanted to do business with. Those things do not return. A person can rebuild finances. A person can find new employment. But the specific version of himself that Marcus had presented to every room he had ever entered, competent, trustworthy, ascending that version is gone. He will have to construct a new one from different materials, and everyone who knew the first one will be able to see the seams. There is a moment in the work I did for 23 years as an investigator when a case closes and the file goes into storage and the thing that was broken either heals or it doesn't, and you move on to the next one. I always understood that moment intellectually. With Sarah, I understood it differently. She is not a case. She is my daughter, and she is 32 years old, and she has the rest of her life ahead of her, and none of what Marcus did to her will define what that life becomes unless she allows it to. She will not allow it. I know this because I have watched her work, the precision of it, the patience of it, the way she holds a room together with color and line, and the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly what she is doing. Marcus saw that quality in her and mistook it for something he could use. He was wrong about that from the beginning. A man can hide an affair behind the right words and the right calendar and the right explanations. What he cannot hide is the pattern beneath the words, the small decisions that accumulate into character, the choices made when he believes no one is paying attention. I had been paying attention for 6 months. That is what I did for a living for 2 decades. And I did not stop knowing how to do it simply because I retired. The truth does not require anyone to look for it, but it does require someone who loves the person being harmed enough to look anyway, and to keep looking, and to be ready when the moment arrives. Have you ever had to protect someone you love in a way you never wanted to need, to quietly, carefully, over months, with no guarantee it would work? I want to hear about it. Every story like that is evidence that the people who matter most to us are not alone in the world, even when it feels that way at 2 in the morning. Even when the phone rings and the voice on the other end says only one word, and you are already reaching for your keys before the second ring ends. If you have ever loved someone enough to stay awake for them, not just one night, but every night it took, you already understand why I made those calls, why I kept those files, why I drove home on that same road without looking back. There are more stories like this one. If that matters to you, I'll be here.